Welcome to Dory Cote on Shamanism, a weekly podcast that explores one theme in shamanism throughout each month. Get comfortable, have a seat, and let's get started.
Welcome to episode 38 of this series on love, compassion, and codependence. This particular podcast this week is about how to express compassion in troubling situations. We're going to do this in two parts. This week, I consider part one.
Dory, can you begin by speaking about what compassion is? In particular, how can compassion be possible in the face of dealing with an abusive person or a difficult family member or challenges with people at work who push all your buttons? How can people find compassion in these situations?
Yes, I would love to speak to that. I would begin by saying that compassion is often associated with love. We often say love and compassion, send love and compassion. And the truth is that compassion can be present without a deep sense of love for a particular person. For instance, I might send love and compassion to a person who is in need of some healing energy, who I've never met, and who lives someplace in another country or across this country somewhere. I don't need to know them. I don't have that kind of love, of familiarity for them. But I do have that love of the divine spark that I was talking about in last week's podcast, knowing that each being, each person has that spark. So compassion, separate from love, is that ability to feel in your heart the meaningfulness of caring for another. In other words, you might look at somebody who is homeless, who is panhandling at a street corner, and you may feel great compassion for that person, knowing that he or she is suffering, not having a home, not having a roof over their head, being cold out in the northeastern part of the United States in the wintertime, having to scrape up funds to be able to eat or find a place to sleep. That is compassion. It's the action of the heart. It's that deep emotional space that we can go to when we see another who is in need of something or someone, or in need of love. And how do we find that? How do we find that in our hearts when we're faced with someone who has been abusive to us, or somebody who is a comrade, somebody who works with us, who pushes all of our buttons because their behavior is something that we have a hard time with? Compassion has to be fostered. It isn't automatic. It is something that we have to work on. We have to develop compassion for others. We have to develop something that goes beyond our initial response to somebody's behavior. So, for instance, let's say you have a friend who, for some reason or other, somewhere in your connection with that person, became abusive, became outraged. Their behavior became unacceptable to you. Your immediate response is probably going to be, whew, I'm stepping away from this. I do not want to be in any way in a situation where I'm being abused. And you might at the outset feel outrage, anger, confusion, judgment, all of that. And yet, what is really vitally important is that over time, and I'm not talking about instantly, not that day, maybe not even that week or that month, but over time, if you are truly a spiritual person and you are committed to spiritual growth, then it is highly important for you to find compassion in your heart for that person or persons, to try to go beyond your own human limitation of judgment or anger or confusion. It is vitally important for the healing of this planet and for the healing of humans for us to develop compassion and love for our enemies, for the people who have hurt us, for the people who have abused us, because that is where the growth of human life needs to evolve in order for us to have what we are always saying, particularly, around the holidays and other times of the year, peace on earth, peace on earth. We want peace on earth, but peace on earth begins in our own heart. It really is it begins here in your heart with having compassion for all people, regardless of how they might have impacted you personally. So, does it mean you hang out with the abuser? No. Does it mean you have a personal relationship with the abuser? No, particularly if you don't feel safe with that person. But you can send compassion to someone without ever seeing them, without ever being in their presence, without ever expressing it in words. You don't have to write the person a letter or make a phone call to them and say, oh, I feel so much compassion for you. No, it's an act of the heart. It's an act of, okay, I know this person acts this way because perhaps they themselves have been hurt. They've been injured in some way. There is something that has broken their heart that makes it impossible for them to behave in a way that I can accept in my own heart. So I am going to allow my heart to feel some compassion for this human, to know that they have a higher self, to know that they have that divine spark that I was talking about in our last podcast. I know that, and therefore I can send love and I can send compassion and understanding without necessarily having to step into being present with that person. And by doing that, I am healing the wounds of our ancestors, the wounds that are occurring here on earth now, and the wounds of the future.
So the psychologist Adler talks about empathy as strengthening and sympathy as weakening. What you're talking about here, to a degree, on this compassion sounds like empathy, stepping into their shoes in a way. Is that true?
Yes, that is exactly true. Compassion and empathy are very closely related, whereas sympathy is far more likely or has the potentiality of becoming codependent, which is something we're going to talk about in one of our future weeks here on this topic. But yes, I would agree with what Adler has to say, that empathy is the core of healing, not just ourselves, but healing others and the planet.
And sympathy has a kind of implicit judgment in it, that you're making some judgment on this person rather than compassion.
I would agree, yes, that sympathy can become codependent. It can also become like that place of like, I am better than this poor person who is suffering here, and that is not helpful. Sympathy truly is not helpful. Even though we send, condolence cards to people saying we send our sympathy, really what is more appropriate is for us to send our empathy and compassion.
Thank you. How can a peace-loving person find compassion for the terrorists in our present and turbulent times?
Yes, again, we have to go back to what I was talking about last time in last week's podcast regarding that spark of divine self. How can we possibly find compassion in our hearts for the people who commit these acts of terror, who murder others mercilessly without regard for the value of human life or the value of any life, of any being? I invoke the power of my own heart when I'm faced with these situations. And surely that has been happening a lot throughout the world. There are so many acts of terrorism, not just here in the United States or in Europe, but all over the world, in Nigeria, in Sudan, in all the countries in the Middle East, in Syria, in Iran, Iraq. Everywhere that we see on the globe, there are acts of terrorism taking place, people who are being murdered senselessly for what appears to be no reason whatsoever to us who have a certain morality, a certain belief. So in my own heart, this is a deep spiritual practice that takes attention, and it isn't something I take lightly. It isn't something I just flippantly say, oh, I'm just going to send compassion to these terrorists. It takes work. It takes a commitment. It takes really digging deep into your own heart and feeling and knowing that these terrorists were not born. Again, I spoke of this just a bit ago. They were not born with the heart of a terrorist. Something in the world was broken. Something ignited a brokenness in their soul, in the fiber of their being that makes them respond and react and act in the way that they do. I can love that divine spark that is in them, and once I have done that, then it is easier for me to find within my own heart the source of compassion for what must have happened to these poor souls that made them heartless, that made them terrorists, that made them the people who have no sense of the value of life, who have a brokenness in their soul that is so profound that they could use weapons to take lives of others. So, do I do this easily? No. And I'm not expecting others to do it easily. But what I'm asking is that we as individual humans devote some of our own time, our own spiritual practice to breathing and finding within our own heart that space, that place where compassion can begin to grow and where we might find the seed of the possibility, the potentiality of having compassion for those people who have harmed us so greatly and who are harming the fiber of human life on earth.
This completes the prepared questions for Part 1 about expressing compassion in troubling situations. Do you have anything you would like to add at this time?
No, I believe not. I look forward to our next podcast where we speak about another layer of finding compassion in these troubling times. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Dory Cote on Shamanism. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, reactions, and questions. Come on over to dorycote.com and join the conversation. And tune in next week for more on this subject, or next month for a new subject. You can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or sign up on DoryCote.com to receive notices when the podcasts are posted. That's Dory, D-O-R-Y, and Cote, C-O-T-E.com. Drumming and rattling by Dory Cote and Terry Morgan. Technical assistance and audio production by JillHackett.com. And this is Susan Savelle, wishing you many blessings in your life. We hope to have you join us next time.